Right? Doesn't work. Just doesn't work. Can't do it. You can't do it, but most people say you can. They can't do it.
Sack up. Nut up or shut up.
C code is now following.
Welcome to To Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Lebanon's declared a day of national mourning after Israel launched its deadliest wave of bombings since resuming large-scale attacks in early March. The devastating attacks began without warning Wednesday, striking Beirut, the Bekaa Valley, Mount Lebanon, Sidon, and villages across southern Lebanon. Lebanon's health ministry said at least 203 people were killed and more than 1,000 injured. Civil defense workers put the death toll even higher at over 250. The attacks struck commercial areas and apartment high-rises and included Sunni Muslim and Christian neighborhoods in central Beirut that are not affiliated with Hezbollah. Belgium's foreign minister, who survived the Israeli strikes just a few hundred yards from the Belgian embassy, wrote on X, quote, "Just before I was commending President Aoun for offering to open official negotiations with Israel towards a ceasefire, Israel launched with no previous warning one of the most massive strikes since the beginning of the hostilities. The ceasefire between the U.S., Israel, and Iran must include Lebanon," the Belgian foreign minister wrote. The United Nations and world leaders quickly condemned the attacks, which came just hours after the U.S. and Iran announced a two-week ceasefire agreement. Pakistan's Prime Minister, Shehbaz Sharif, who helped broker the deal, called on all parties to exercise restraint and respect the ceasefire as agreed upon. Both Sharif and the Speaker of the Iranian parliament had said the ceasefire was supposed to include Lebanon. But on Wednesday, Trump officials, including Vice President J.D. Vance, said Lebanon was not part of the deal.
I think this comes from a legitimate misunderstanding. I think the Iranians thought that the ceasefire included Lebanon, and it just didn't. We never made that promise.
President Trump warned Iran that U.S. forces will remain deployed across the Middle East until a, quote, real agreement, unquote, is reached between the two countries. Trump's threat came as Iranian media reported Tehran is considering pulling out of the ceasefire deal with Washington amidst Israel's stepped-up assault on Lebanon and conflicting accounts over the Strait of Hormuz. On Wednesday, the White House denied reports that Iran continues to control shipping through the waterway, with Press Secretary Carolyn Leavitt citing a, quote, uptick of traffic, unquote. According to ship tracking data, just 4 vessels passed through the waterway Wednesday with their transponders turned on. That compares to an average of 140 vessels per day before the U.S. and Israeli attacks. In the Gaza Strip, an Israeli drone strike Wednesday killed Al Jazeera Mubashir correspondent Mohammed Wisha as he was traveling along the coastal road that runs west of Gaza City. The attack caused his car to burst into flames. 7 bystanders were reportedly injured. Wisha joins a long list of Al Jazeera journalists killed by Israeli forces in Gaza, including Samar Abu Daqqa, Hamza al-Dadou, Ismail al-Ghul, Ahmed al-Lu, and Hossam Shabat. Gaza's media office says Wisha's killing reflects a, quote, systematic targeting and assassination, unquote, of Palestinian journalists by Israel. His death brings the total number of journalists killed in Gaza since October 2023 to 262. Al Jazeera says it will pursue legal action. 6 aid workers were killed in the line of duty across 21 countries last year, bringing the 3-year death toll to more than 1,000. That's according to the UN's top aid coordinator, Tom Fletcher, who briefed the UN Security Council on Wednesday. More than 560 of those deaths occurred in Gaza and the occupied West Bank, 130 in Sudan, 60 in South Sudan, and 25 each in Ukraine and the Democratic Republic of Congo. The International Committee of the Red Cross warned the UN Security Council, quote, "We are losing our humanity in war," unquote. This is UN Humanitarian Chief Tom Fletcher.
These trends, alongside the collapse in funding for our life-saving work, are a symptom of a lawless, bellicose, selfish and violent world. Killing humanitarians is part of the broader attack on the UN Charter and on international humanitarian law.
Here in New York, about 500 anti-war demonstrators led by Jewish Voice for Peace gathered Wednesday outside the home of Comptroller Mark Levine, protesting his plans to invest New York City pension funds in Israeli bonds, which provide resources for Israel's bombing of Iran, Lebanon, and Gaza, they said. Joining the emergency Passover Seder was Mahmoud Khalil, the Columbia University student activist and prisoner who was jailed by ICE for over 100 days beginning in March of last year.
Levine says it's profitable to invest in the Israeli bonds. He says that they are solid investments with high returns. It's not surprising that a war economy is profitable. That's what Israel economy is. It's a war economy. That's why there is high yields. But buying these bonds only ensures the injustice, and the system of occupation continues.
President Trump met with NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte at the White House Wednesday amidst growing threats to pull the U.S. from the military alliance. After the meeting, Trump lashed out on social media, saying in all caps, quote, "NATO wasn't there when we needed them, and they won't be there if we need them again. Remember Greenland, that big, poorly run piece of ice," 3 exclamation points. Meanwhile, the Wall Street Journal reports the Trump administration is considering moving U.S. troops out of NATO member countries Spain and Germany as punishment for not supporting the U.S. in its war on Iran. The Trump administration's once again seeking to eliminate a federal program that helps low-income households pay heating and cooling bills. It's the 6th time a White House budget proposal under President Trump has proposed eliminating LIHEAP, the Low-Income Home Energy Assistance Program. Its cancellation would impact at least 6 million low-income households at a time of spiraling energy costs, saving about $4 billion in annual spending. Meanwhile, a new analysis finds deep cuts to federal funding for food assistance in Trump's so-called One Big Beautiful Bill led to 2.5 million fewer Americans receiving SNAP benefits in the second half of 2025. This comes as the White House has proposed a record-shattering $1.5 trillion Pentagon budget for the next fiscal year. Voters in Georgia's 14th congressional district have elected Republican Clay Fuller to replace Marjorie Taylor Greene, a former top ally of Donald Trump, who resigned from Congress last year after breaking with the president over Gaza, the spiraling cost of health care, and the Epstein files. Fuller is a lieutenant colonel in the Georgia Air National Guard, who worked as a fellow at the White House during Trump's first term. His victory over Democrat Sean Harris preserves the Republican Party's narrow majority in the House of Representatives. But Fuller won by fewer than 12 percentage points in a district Trump carried by 37 points in the 2024 election. Another sign that Republicans are poised for historic losses in November's midterm elections. Meanwhile, in Wisconsin, appeals court judge Chris Taylor was elected to a 10-year term on the state Supreme Court in Tuesday's election. Her victory over a conservative opponent expands the liberal majority on Wisconsin's Supreme Court amidst partisan fights over abortion rights, voting rights, and labor laws. In North Carolina, federal prosecutors have charged a former civilian employee at the Fort Bragg Army base with sharing classified defense information with a journalist. An indictment accuses 40-year-old Courtney Williams with violating the 1917 Espionage Act, as well as multiple non-disclosure agreements after she spoke with journalist Seth Harp about sexual and race-based harassment at Fort Bragg. Harp published his findings in his book, The Fort Bragg Cartel, and in a Politico magazine article. FBI Director Kash Patel announced Williams' arrest in a social media post, writing, quote, "This FBI will not tolerate those who seek to betray our country and put Americans in harm's way," unquote. Seth Harp responded in a statement, quote, "Ironically, while the FBI was monitoring my phone and investigating Courtney on vague and weak charges, the perpetrators of half a dozen murders involving Fort Bragg soldiers involved in the drug trade have gone entirely unsolved. A real police agency would go after real criminals instead of engaging in this sort of penny-ante political theater," unquote. To see our interview with journalist Seth Harp about U.S. Special Forces involvement in drug trafficking and murder at Fort Bragg, visit our website.
Oh, thanks for the follow. Thanks for the follow, S3 Sega God? Is that it? Sega God? Sea God? Oh, it's Sea God. I'm dumb. They used the 3 the same way as my nickname.
democracynow.org. Former Attorney General Pam Bondi will not appear before the House Oversight Committee for her scheduled April 14th deposition on the Epstein files. The Justice Department says Bondi was subpoenaed in her capacity as Attorney General and doesn't have to testify because she no longer holds that office. Trump removed Bondi from her role last week over the Justice Department's handling of the Epstein files. Last month, Bondi and Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche appeared for a closed-door briefing with the House Oversight Committee, prompting a walkout by Democrats who demanded Bondi testify under oath. Democratic Congressmember Robert Garcia said in a statement that the congressional subpoena is binding regardless of her firing as AG, saying, quote, "Our bipartisan subpoena is to Pam Bondi."
Why would she get immunity from prosecution or testify in front of Congress? What the hell? Why does that give her immunity? That's impossible.
Whether she's Attorney General or not, she must come in to testify immediately, and if she defies the subpoena, we will begin contempt charges, unquote. Republican Congressmember Nancy Mace said, quote, "Pam Bondi was subpoenaed by name, not by title," unquote. Meanwhile, Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick will voluntarily meet with the committee next month to answer questions about his connection to the late convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. The Epstein files show Lutnick remained in contact with Epstein for years, even after Lutnick claimed to have cut off ties. Lutnick and his family and their nannies visited Epstein's Island in 2012, 4 years after Epstein pleaded guilty to soliciting a minor for prostitution. And here in New York, about 150 workers at ProPublica held a 24-hour strike Wednesday to demand their first collective bargaining agreement since they organized a union in 2023.
Damn, let's go.
Workers are seeking higher salaries, protections against layoffs, and agreement over the use of artificial intelligence. This is Katie Campbell, a documentary filmmaker and journalist at ProPublica.
We've heard at the bargaining table that we're special and that we are not a factory. We're not factory workers making widgets, but I think that all workers, regardless of industry, deserve job protections, and we shouldn't be any different than people who are working in factories or who are nurses or who are teachers. We should be able to have the same kind of job protections that other workers in other industries have.
And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Thanks for watching Democracy Now! On YouTube. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to make sure you never miss a video. And for more of our audience-supported journalism, go to democracynow.org, where you can download our news app, sign up. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. The war is turning Iran into a major world power. That's the headline of a new op-ed in the New York Times by our next guest, Robert Pape, professor of political science at the University of Chicago. Professor Pape writes Iran's control over the Strait of Hormuz could help elevate Iran to become a fourth center of global power, along with the United States, China, and Russia.
Trump has made the biggest blunder of any president that I can remember. This is the biggest blunder I think that I've seen a president make. Did I just repeat myself? But I did it on purpose. Oh my God, it's so hard to... I'm listening to my voice as I'm talking, and there's a slight delay. It's so hard. I can't do it.
Pape writes, quote,
I
if
can't do it,
Iranian
folks.
control over the strait persists for months or years, as I believe
Not
it may,
today.
it will drastically reshape the
brain's
global
fried.
order to the detriment of the United States, unquote. Professor Pape joins us now from London. Welcome to Democracy Now!, Professor. Can you lay out your argument, why you believe the war is turning Iran into a major world power?
Yes. Thank you very much for having me. What most people
He's on the
know
phone?
is that Iran is causing oil shortages through selective blockade using drones and mines. I'm going one step further. I'm discussing the power that selective blockade gives Iran today, in the coming months, and in the coming years. It is power because of geography. The choke point at Hormuz is geographically perfectly located to allow Iran to selectively control the shipping through Hormuz, which means it can use that selective control as leverage to gain political power in the Gulf, change the hierarchy, change the balance of power in the Gulf from a balance to a hierarchy where
that's a plus.
Iran now is at the top of the hierarchy. And if other states do not accept Iran's power, they lose tremendous gross domestic product. Also,
I mean, is he going to mention that the insurance companies won't cover the boats? And that's really why they're not going through, right?
Asia, the power that Iran has
to
cause the Asian states to distance themselves from the United States is already evident, and that's only going to grow over time because Asia is ground zero for the economic shock effects that Iran can have with its selective blockade. Then on top of that, when you look at the United States, look at how little power the United States has for its basing, with its basing structure in the Persian Gulf. We know the United States has bases in Kuwait, Qatar, Bahrain, but look how vulnerable those bases are, how much they've actually had to stand down operations, and our own aircraft carriers are 1,000 miles away from the Persian Gulf for fear that they will be hit and sunk. What all this adds up to is growing power of Iran, diminishing power of the United States, and on top of all of that, Amy, over the next months and year, there will be $100 billion of oil revenues going into Iran. This will be in Chinese banks that can be used to transform that nuclear-enriched material into working nuclear weapons. And if we can't destroy the drones in those deep caves, what makes us think we're really going to stop Iran from becoming a
we should make friends with them
in the next 6
like
months
what
or
the
a year?
fuck?
You add all that up,
no war,
and Iran
only
will
peace.
become a nuclear weapons oil hegemon in the near future, in the coming months, coming years. That means it will be the fourth center of world power.
You write, it's possible to control the strait without closing it. Explain how that's occurring.
We are watching in real time. Iran is declaring, unless you cooperate with the Iranian military will sink your ship as it goes through the Strait of Hormuz. And that threat has been made credible over 40 days of actually doing that. Just a few days ago, a Kuwaiti oil tanker tried to run the strait. And what happened? It was hit. The French, for the first time in this war about 2 days ago, first
That's
time
all that they need.
that a European tanker got through, that happened as President Macron.
He tried to run the strait. Like, they're going 2 miles an hour.
In any military endeavor to wrestle the Strait of Hormuz from Iran, and would in fact cooperate with Iran. So what you see is cooperation. That is political kowtowing. It's you oil. If you don't do that, you get your ship sunk. And Iran is doing this, has been doing this now for 40 days. So it is a highly credible instrument of power, and Iran is not likely to surrender it. In all my studies, for 35 years, I have never found a state in the last 300 years that has willingly surrendered world power. And that's why the ceasefire is breaking down.
You posted on social media yesterday,
like I said,
quote,
Trump blundered
power isn't just about what you control. It's about what you can put at risk. In a global economy, risk equals power. Explain.
Like I said,
so
it's about the risk.
In political science, international relations, we have all our measures of raw power. We look at gross domestic product. We look at military forces. We look at nuclear weapons.
Believe it or not, I took 3 political science courses in college. Didn't graduate, but
what all of those static indicators are about, Amy, is the ability of a state to threaten other states, in other words, to make other states vulnerable. What you are seeing with Iran is that it's geography in combination with a level of drone technology that we simply cannot destroy. We can destroy 50.
Just think if they had some real drone tech.
50% of it, 70% of it, but Iran, thanks to the geography of the straits, only needs a small amount of offensive power, a number of drones, a small number of mines, in order to achieve the mission it must achieve to make the countries vulnerable, which is to sink their ships. This is actually quite similar to the Vietnam War, where the Ho Chi Minh Trail, America, through air power, was able to cut 80–90% of the throughput of the Ho Chi Minh Trail, but we could never get the final 10%, and that's why the VC won.
Professor Pape, your Substack page is called The Escalation Trap. What is that?
The escalation trap is when a strong country, the United States, uses military force, air power, that can be tactically successful. Bombs hit targets, bombs kill leaders, but it does not produce strategic success. And that looming prospect of defeat for that power that just launched that attack is what drives that state up the escalation ladder to look for a rung that it will find victory. And that's exactly what you see with Donald Trump. Donald Trump started this war with a essentially 3-day air plan. Yes, he had some backups, but he was telling us this is going to be over in 3 days. Well, instead of causing the regime of Iran to collapse, it got stronger. It is now a more vicious, a stronger regime than before. So he launched the air campaign. Well, the air campaign was supposed to
weaken
Iran,
smart.
and we did destroy launchers. But what that did is
I wonder
it
if she's
allowed
like,
Iran
I want you
to
on the phone.
lash
That's
back
fine.
in a horizontal escalation that
Can't get you in the
seized the
studio.
Strait of
We need you on the
Hormuz.
phone.
Now, after 40 days, Iran hasn't just seized the control of the Strait of Hormuz. It's feeling its
It controls
power,
it
Amy.
now.
It is now using its power. It's
As
learning.
it should.
This isn't
I'm
just
sorry.
theoretical power capability. This is real power capability, and you see this with India. India is effectively cooperating with Iran, bowing to Iran, and that's why a number of Indian oil tankers have been able to get through. In the French I just mentioned, and over time, this is going to exert enormous power. Iran will exert enormous power over the states in the Persian Gulf. One of the reasons the Saudis and the UAE are so desperate, but where are they going to go for protection? Donald Trump's nowhere has proven his protection isn't worth anything. So over time, you will probably see more and more bandwagoning toward Iran. The alternative for those Gulf states, if they don't bandwagon, is Iran will probably topple their governments.
I want to get your response to Defense Secretary Hegseth speaking after the ceasefire was announced.
Operation Epic Fury was a historic and overwhelming victory on the battlefield, a capital V military victory.
So I want to get your response to that, especially in light of you writing, imagine Iran with control of about 20% of the world's oil, Russia with about 11%, and China able to soak up much of that supply. They would form a cartel to deny the West 30% of the world's oil. Professor Page.
Exactly. What you're hearing, Amy, from Secretary Hegseth is victory narrative, but it's meeting escalation reality. The reality is Iran is far stronger than it was just 40 days ago. It is in control of 20% of the world's oil. It is now an emerging fourth center of power, and the other centers of power are not all competing with each other. The United States is on one side, and the rivals are China, Russia, and now Iran. And even if those three rivals don't form a NATO-like integrated command structure, they will structurally, just because of the nature of the power balance, they will structurally end up tacitly or explicitly working together. And as you just explained in my op-ed, I lay out a very plausible scenario. With Iran's 20% of the world's oil, Russia has 11%. Why exactly are they not going to work together at some point in the near future to cut that, to deny that 30% of the world's oil to Europe, to the West, and essentially let China soak up that oil? This will be tremendous leverage they will wield, and unless we start to recognize that, this may become a reality because that's 30% of the world's oil is a tremendous amount of pressure, and even America won't be able to escape the consequences of that.
Is there a way out of the escalation trap right now? And can you comment on what's about to take place? You have Vice President Vance headed from Hungary to Islamabad to join with Witkoff and President Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, to negotiate with Iran.
Well, there are only two ways to settle this. One on the battlefield, that's the escalation trap. The other at the negotiating table. The problem with the negotiating table is that given Iran's surge in power, the price to get Iran to even give up a sliver or half of that power is going up and going up and going up. So the deals that were on offer on February 27th simply are not going to be enough. Iran already wanted its 3.5% enriched uranium on February 27th. Well, notice now it has more power, so it's not going to go back to the old deal. The one card that could be played that would really matter, I believe, get Iran's attention would be a enforceable military containment of Israel. You see, Iran has said very clearly it wants protection, confidence that it won't be attacked in the future by from both the United States and Israel. Well, you might think the United States has gotten enough of a black eye here, it might back off. Israel's a completely different story, as your previous stories were just laying out. So a true military containment of Israel, possibly even Israel joining the NPT and having to accept that there's on-site inspections in Iran, there'll be on-site inspections of the nuclear facilities, the nuclear and material production facilities at Dimona. Now we're talking. But if that's not politically possible, if we say that's just not ever going to happen, then how else are you really going to get out of the trap? What would you give Iran to surrender world power? I don't think they're going to take a sucker deal at this point.
Thanks for watching Democracy Now! On YouTube. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to make sure you never miss a video. And for more of our audience-supported journalism, go to democracynow.org, where you can download our news app, sign up for our newsletter, subscribe to the daily podcast, and so much more.
So tensions are heating up in the Middle East as Tehran accuses Israel of violating the ceasefire deal by striking Lebanon.
So Iran's president warning that continued attacks will bring, quote, explicit costs and strong responses and will make negotiations meaningless.
Chief Foreign Correspondent Trey Ying's been live in Tel Aviv with the latest for us. Hey, Trey.
Yeah, hey guys, good morning. A significant statement just now from Iran's President Masoud Pezeshkian saying that if Israeli actions in Lebanon continue, that it will render the negotiations that are set to take place on Saturday in Islamabad meaningless. Yesterday, we know the Israelis conducted dozens of airstrikes against Hezbollah positions inside of Lebanon, not just striking the southern Dakhla neighborhood in Beirut, but really the entirety of the country, including the Bekaa Valley and closer to the Israel-Lebanon border. The IDF says they also killed Ali Karshi, the secretary to Iran's largest proxy, Hezbollah, and that is the secretary to Hezbollah, and not the secretary general, but of course this is a top official. And Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says these types of strikes will continue with more goals to complete. Take a listen.
We have more goals to complete, and we will achieve them either by agreement or by renewing the fighting. We are prepared to return to fighting at any moment necessary. Our finger is on the trigger.
With talks this weekend scheduled in Islamabad, Pakistan, the president overnight took to Truth Social to say, quote, all U.S. ships, aircraft, and military personnel with additional ammunition, weaponry, and anything else there is appropriate and necessary for the lethal prosecution and destruction of an already substantially degraded enemy will remain in place and around Iran until such time as the real agreement reached is fully complied with. Now, there is a lot of focus today on the Strait of Hormuz. Yesterday, 4 vessels were allowed to pass through, but the Iranians are still saying publicly they're in control of the strait and that it is closed right now. Vessels have to check in with the Iranian military, and other reports indicate they'd like to charge a toll for vessels to pass through this critical thoroughfare. Vice President J.D. Vance yesterday talking about new threats against Iran before the negotiations begin.
I encourage the Iranians to come to the table seriously. We've seen some signs that they're going to do that. We've seen some signs of bravado. Fundamentally, we're in a good spot. They're reopening the straits. We have a ceasefire. And frankly, if they break their end of the bargain, then they're going to see some serious consequences.
48 hours before negotiations are set to start in Islamabad, Pakistan, this is the situation. The Strait of Hormuz right now appears to be closed. Additionally, the atomic energy chief for Iran says that they will continue to enrich uranium in direct contradiction to what President Trump said yesterday. And just moments ago, Iran's President Masoud Pezeshkian said the negotiations will be meaningless if the Israelis continue their operation against Hezbollah. Guys?
Yeah, Trey, the president also said in that same statement, according to Reuters, we will not abandon the Lebanese people. So, I mean, the deal is over before we even start.
Look, the Iranians are known for not being good faith negotiators, and this is the challenge for the Trump administration. We heard yesterday Caroline Leavitt, the press secretary at the White House, laying out the U.S. plan to send a top-tier delegation to Islamabad, led by the Vice President, J.D. Vance, with Special Envoys Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff, to try and get a deal done. The president, once again, is extending an olive branch to the Iranians, an off-ramp in this conflict, understanding that there are still more than 50,000 U.S. forces in the region that at a moment's notice could start firing again if ordered by the president. And once again, the Iranians do not appear to be taking this very seriously. There's a very clear agreement here, and an updated agreement, we are told by U.S. officials. The points that the Iranians were putting out over the past 2 days were described to me as propaganda. They're trying to spin the negotiators ahead of these in-person talks in Pakistan. And so what we know here is that the commitments the Iranians made are not being adhered to ahead of these conversations, and it does raise serious questions about if they are willing to make a good faith agreement. But the president, in that post on Truth Social overnight, was very clear. The U.S. military remains prepared to respond if Iran wants to play around and not create a solid deal to end this conflict.
It wasn't the whole point of this ceasefire to open up the Strait of Hormuz. Now they're saying, Iran's foreign minister is saying, okay, we'll let you pass through safely if you coordinate with Iran's armed forces.
They're literally saying the opposite of what this is. They're telling on America. This is what America's doing, not what they're doing. This is so crazy. How are they doing this? They aren't saying that. I mean, he directly contradicted himself, this reporter. He's like, yeah, Iran says they won't, if we don't stop bombing Lebanon, we won't come to the negotiations, right? And then he turns around and says, yeah, that's not proper negotiations.
Forces and you take certain routes, but they don't have the ability to tell people to do that, because that was the whole point of this. No more firing rockets into Iran if you open up the strait. But they haven't done that, Trey.
It's a
Why would you open the strait before the negotiations have begun?
dangerous game, and they don't really understand who they're dealing with here. The president is a deal maker. He's someone who, even when we talked about the negotiations,
Iran has only responded to missiles coming their way from Israel. And so what Fox News is doing is saying, oh, we have nothing to do with Israel. Which is so disingenuous, because of obviously that's on its face, untrue, completely untrue.
negotiations was very clear. He sees the horizon here. And again, he is giving the Iranians a chance. But if they already are going back on parts of the deal, it will be interesting what they say behind the scenes. Oftentimes, the Iranians in public will try to negotiate with the press, or they will try to put out statements that make their side look more favorable and then make concessions behind the scenes. That is very possible. That's happening right now. We have to simply wait and see what comes out of these conversations in Pakistan on Saturday. But if the Iranians are still pledging to enrich uranium, if they are unwilling to open the Strait of Hormuz, and if they are still trying to support regional proxies like Hezbollah, we are looking at a situation where the region is likely headed back into war.
Yeah.
The reason they support Hezbollah is because they're defending Lebanon. And it's in their best interest to make sure Lebanon doesn't get taken over by fucking Israel. Israel is the problem. They even have the Israel flag right here. Look. They have America and Israel as one flag. Blending
Trey,
together.
The last thing we would say, if the president had a...
Someone spent time blending this together. Look. Look, the red bleeds into the white. It's actually disgusting. Who'd have thunk that the empire would fall via external power, i.e. vis-a-vis Israel?
Battle plan, a war plan to take back the
never
strait.
thunk that.
I assume this is what the pause could be about, getting ready for that moment, because we cannot leave this conflict with the strait in the hands of the Iranians. If you take international waters and allow any...
Dude, you can't take the strait. What do you mean? You have to take Iran. This is foolish talk.
One country to take control over it, you realize the message it sends to other countries around the world, like China.
Absolutely.
Whoopsie.
And if we've learned anything from
yeah,
Operation
they're
Epic Fury,
starting to
it's that the
realize
Trump
how bad Trump
administration is
fucked up.
preparing and has contingency plans in place for a variety of options. So while the Iranians are talking, the Americans are preparing. And again, this speaks to the advantage that the United
The
States
real
has,
agreement.
not just at the negotiating table, but also on the battlefield. The Iranian military was
Okay.
decimated over the past 40 days.
No, it wasn't.
The United States and Israel took out the production lines that make the drones and missiles that the Iranians are using and used over the past 40 days against regional countries and U.S. forces. They have hammered the leadership of the regime, taking out dozens of officials. And again, this is part of the reason that the Iranians are trying to publicly leverage the Americans, because they're out of options. They have no leverage left at the negotiating table or on the battlefield. And that's why you're hearing these remarks from top Iranian officials. There's a connection to all of this. Hezbollah is Iran's largest proxy in the region. The president has been very clear. The vice president was very clear. And Israel's prime minister was very clear. Lebanon is not attached to this deal. Iran's president today says they are. And so that will get worked out on Saturday. But again, the United States is preparing and the Iranians are talking.
Yeah, thanks so much, Trey. And by the way, when the Lebanese, don't act like you're helping the Lebanese officials. Hezbollah is the one that's been supported by Iran, not the Lebanese people,
Right.
who would love at this point for Hezbollah to go find something else to do.
And Hezbollah is in a neighborhood in a certain part of Lebanon. So when they're firing missiles into that neighborhood, they're attacking Hezbollah, not necessarily the innocent people in other areas.
I'm Steve Ducey.
I'm Brian Kilmeade.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis.
Let's hand it on off to Alexandria Hoff, live in Washington with the latest on the Iran negotiations. Alex.
Hey, good morning to you both. The U.S. and Iran plan to hold talks this weekend in Islamabad. Vice President Vance leading those, as President Trump says U.S. forces will remain in the region until a lasting peace agreement is made. He wrote this, quote, all U.S. ships, aircraft, and military personnel with additional ammunition, weaponry, and anything else that is appropriate and necessary for the lethal prosecution and destruction of an already substantially degraded enemy will remain in place and around Iran until such time as the real agreement reached is fully complied with. Now, the current ceasefire does remain fragile, as you said. Iran claims that it has already been breached by Israeli strikes on Lebanon targeting Hezbollah. The Iranian-backed militant group vowed to continue attacks on Israel. In response to that, the U.S. and Israel both say Lebanon was not included in the ceasefire, a misunderstanding, according to the vice president.
What we said is that the ceasefire would be focused on Iran and the ceasefire would be focused on America's allies, both Israel and the Gulf Arab states. If Iran wants to let this negotiation fall apart in a conflict where they were getting hammered over Lebanon, which has nothing to do with them and which the United States never once said was part of the ceasefire, that's ultimately their choice. We think that would be dumb, but that's their choice.
Iran's foreign minister, he objects to that, writing this: the Iran-U.S. ceasefire terms are clear and explicit. The U.S. must choose ceasefire or continued war via Israel. It cannot have both. The world sees the massacres in Lebanon. The ball is in the U.S. court, and the world is watching whether it will act on its commitments. Iranian state media also reporting that Tehran has closed the Strait of Hormuz. This is a major point of contention and of disagreement right now. The U.S. and allies demand it remains open. Guys.
All right, Alexandria Hoff, live for us in Washington. Alex, thank you. Let's bring in Chief Strategist of the Middle East Forum and former U.S. Army Special Forces member Jim Hansen. Jim, thank you so much for joining us. We got a little bit of clarity yesterday when it comes to the starting point for these negotiations with White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt. Listen here.
The Iranians originally put forward a 10-point plan that was fundamentally unserious, unacceptable, and completely discarded. It was literally thrown in the garbage by President Trump and his negotiating team. Many outlets in this room have falsely reported on that plan as being acceptable to the United States, and that is false.
Okay, so the plan that was widely reported, that was basically an Iranian wish list we can all throw out in the trash, but there are still a whole lot of daylight between the two sides here. The United States, Israel, and Iran. So given what we know so far, which is not a whole lot, how do you think negotiations are going to go this weekend?
One thing to consider about a ceasefire is it's not a peace deal. You know, if we had all of this hammered out beforehand and the deal was ready, we wouldn't have to negotiate one. So I think the idea of a ceasefire is to stop shooting long enough that we can go ahead and start beating, you know, the actual plan into shape. There is a lot of room between the two positions. You know, I know the Iranian 10-point plan was wish casting on their part, and they didn't expect a lot of that. But they need to realize that President Trump is not going to cave or compromise in any way on the most important things: no nukes, no missiles, and no funding terror in the region. They're going to agree to those, or there will be no deal.
And also, Jim, the Strait of Hormuz, a major issue and really up in the air, with Iran saying they're blocking the strait because of Israel and Hezbollah. There's also this situation with the tolls, where Iran is charging tolls for ships to cross. And then President Trump yesterday said that this could ultimately be a joint venture between the U.S. and Iranians. So where do things go with the Strait of Hormuz?
It needs to open one way or another. President Trump, I think, is giving the Iranians a little bit of hope, you know, and say, hey, maybe we'll do a business deal together. That's 100% his way. Whether that stays in the end, I think it would be unpleasant for some people. But if we get to the point where the rest of the important things, the actual dangerous things, are agreed to, then a toll for ships going through there is not the worst thing in the world. I think that'll try to be negotiated away, though. It's not something we want to make as a precedent.
One thing that came
Hey,
out
the
of the
Iranians
press
like
briefing
tariffs
yesterday
too.
was that Caroline Leavitt confirmed that Iran had indicated that it would turn over its stocks of enriched uranium. Big deal. What do you think about that?
That's the biggest deal. I mean, they have, you know, near bomb grade uranium, and we can't allow that. That's an intolerable situation. They're
No, they don't.
somewhere between 10 and 14 days from breakout with that.
No.
So we can't allow them to keep that. That was
Not
kind
true.
of the whole point of this. If they don't agree to give that, then we're going to have a big problem. But
There's no
I don't
proof of
see any
that.
reason for negotiations to happen unless they have actually agreed to do that. That would be the number one thing. And then everything else after that is a secondary notion. So that would be a tremendous win for the world, and the reason President Trump launched Operation Epic Fury.
Yeah, and you know, on that point, endless opinions and criticism from both sides when it comes to how this war should go and where it's going. But I think one fundamental question that everybody should be asking themselves is if the United States is safer now as a result of what has taken place so far. How would you answer that question?
We are undoubtedly safer than before
How?
this began. The Iranians had a much greater capability to project power in the region, to
You're an
cause
idiot.
trouble, to push
This
their
guy's an
proxies,
idiot.
to do things.
Literal idiot.
Now they're basically trying to stay alive.
IQ
You know,
of
they
10.
have no legitimate military weapons. All they have left are asymmetric things like suicide boats and other ways, you know, to cause major trouble. No doubt about that. But no Air Force, you know, no Navy, no legitimate threats that I think the military has done a tremendous job in neutralizing. And that right there is a major step forward for security in the region and for security around the world.
Yeah. And going back to something we were talking about previously, can you help us understand why the conflict between Israel and Hezbollah is still ongoing when Israel is supporting the ceasefire with Iran?
The problem is that Hezbollah is right on Israel's border. You know, the Litani River was agreed to be a dividing line, and Hezbollah is not supposed to be south of that. The government of Lebanon and the UN are supposed to enforce that. They failed to do so, and consequently, Hezbollah has their rocket launchers and other things right on Israel's border, shooting across that border and driving Israelis out of their homes. That's an intolerable situation from them. Now, that's a proxy of Iran, but it's also a completely separate issue between Hezbollah and Israel. And they have every right to go ahead and push them back far enough up north that they can't shoot rockets and you know, destroy the lives and livelihood of the Israelis on the border.
It's going to be a big weekend and a very important
inside
2 weeks.
a
Jim Hansen
sovereign
live for us.
country?
Jim, thank you so much.
Be sure to like and subscribe for all the Fox News latest on YouTube and catch full shows streaming now on Fox 1.
It's all going down Saturday for Trump's big, beautiful ceasefire. The White House confirming J.D. Vance is taking the lead in talks with the Iranian negotiators in Islamabad this weekend. Steve Witkoff, Jared Kushner, they'll also be there. This comes after President Trump made the mullahs cry uncle agreeing to a 2-week ceasefire, but only if they open the Strait of Hormuz. Meanwhile, the libs are still crashing out over that Trump truth, where he casually threatened that a whole civilization will die. But Caroline had to spell it out for him.
Why is it appropriate for the President of the United States to use that kind of language when talking about civilian targets?
Well, I understand the questions about the president's rhetoric, but what the president cares most about is results.
How can the president claim that America can ever have the moral high ground if he's threatening to destroy civilizations?
The president absolutely has the moral high ground over the Iranian terrorist regime, and for you to even suggest otherwise is frankly insulting.
What was your understanding of what he meant when he said, this civilization is going to be eliminated?
I think it was a very, very strong threat from the President of the United States that led the Iranian regime to cave to their knees and ask for a ceasefire and agree to reopening the Strait of Hormuz.
David getting his pregame on before Saturday with
It's not
some choice
open.
words for the Iranians, who claim the U.S.
It's
has
not even
violated the
open.
deal.
We have a negotiation that's supposed to start this weekend. That's the truth. I think it's a good first step. I think this comes from a legitimate misunderstanding. I think the Iranians thought that the ceasefire included Lebanon, and it just didn't. If Iran wants to let this negotiation fall apart in a conflict where they were getting hammered over Lebanon, which has nothing to do with them and which the United States never once said was part of the ceasefire, that's ultimately their choice. We think that would be dumb. I did see that tweet from Ghalibaf actually just a couple of minutes ago. I actually wonder how good he is at understanding English, because there are things that he said that frankly didn't make sense.
Naturally, the Democrats' top leaders are jealous of the deal maker in chief. Listen.
A 2-week ceasefire is insufficient. We need a permanent end to Donald Trump's reckless war of choice.
Gas prices, worse shape. Iran's nuclear ambition, we're in worse shape. American credibility, we're in worse shape. This war is a colossal failure.
Okay, Dana, ceasefire, fragile, it's being described as.
So I know you've heard of the fog of war. I'm in the fog of ceasefire. I'm not exactly sure. Remember last week, was it last week you said we were intelligent if we said we didn't know? I'm really intelligent today.
Yes.
I do think Caroline had one of her best briefings today, because one of the things she did is say, I hear your question, I get it, I understand on the rhetoric, however, and then she went on, but she also pointed out that the original 10 points were a total deal breaker. And so I think J.D. Vance certainly has his work cut out for him, but he, in that clip we just played, I think he's up for it, right? He says, okay, I am clear on what the president wants. I am clear on such and such regarding Lebanon in particular. And I wanted to mention something on that. And I know that he knows this, but what he didn't say is that, why does Iran say that this has to include Lebanon? Because they fund Hezbollah. And Hezbollah is the one that in southern Lebanon has been giving Israel the business, meaning militarily, like sending bombs and terrorist attacks forever. So that's why Iran wants us to stop. And that's why Israel is saying, oh, yeah, no, that is not going to stop. I said yesterday it felt like a blur. There's no doubt that militarily Iran is on its back heels. But that was like putting the NFL up against a high school team, right? They should be on their heels. And I just keep going back to the president saying he demanded an unconditional surrender from the regime. But, okay, so let's say we were never going to get unconditional surrender, but how far did we get down the way? I'm not exactly sure, and maybe we won't know until after this negotiation. However, is America and Israel safer today than they were before this because of taking away these capabilities of the Iranian military? I say yes. The one big sticking point is that
That's bullshit.
The Strait of Hormuz is now something that Iran knows, oh, we know exactly how to hold the world hostage on this. So I'm not sure where that ends up. I don't like the idea of a toll. That's not good. We can't do that all around the world, but it does have to be open.
Can't do tariffs?
I think they're going to say 12 ships get to go through tomorrow. It's usually 100 a day. So for Americans and people around the world looking for relief on energy prices, it's not going to come immediately. But again, I'm in the blur of the ceasefire, so that's a lot of words to say. I'm not sure what's going on.
Jessica, are you happy that there's a ceasefire? Are you mad that there's a ceasefire? Where do you stand?
I stand, I think, in reality that there is no ceasefire. I was watching coverage of this last night, flipping around, obviously watching your show, Jesse, and then perusing some other channels. And there were split screens between, White House announces ceasefire and missiles raining down on the Israelis. We knew that Israel was sending rockets back to Iran. We know what today has looked like in Lebanon with what the Israelis are doing there. It's one of the highest death toll days. So the ceasefire was a complete fiction. And what J.D. Vance is saying, and the White House now, Caroline Leavitt, that those 10 points were completely unacceptable, that's only because some of the biggest boosters of the administration came out and said, are you kidding me? Look at what you're agreeing to. Like Mark Levin, who has obviously been very close to this process. He took, what Fox and Friends had put up this morning and said this 10 points are a disaster. Last night, Larry Kudlow asked on social media, is this what we want? I mean, the deal, the 10 points that they sent in response to our 15 points allow them, as Dana said, to control the Strait of Hormuz and to decide what they charge. So that could be $2 million per tanker, and they split that with the Omanis, or then the FT reported this morning a proposal to do $1 for every barrel, and they want it to be paid in crypto, which would be untraceable. And we know that because Donald Trump loves to be paid in crypto. No shutting down of the nuclear program. You can continue to enrich uranium. The leadership, not a problem. Can keep supporting those proxy forces. That's the Hezbollah problem. And then that sanctions would be lifted. We already took off $14 billion in sanctions. This would go even further. And Donald Trump would be the first president, certainly in recent memory, that didn't have economic sanctions on Iran. The linchpin story on this, and we have been tracing this particular plot line since the beginning, is what Jonathan Swan and Maggie Haberman reported yesterday in the excerpt of their book that comes out in a couple of months. And it's about a meeting on February 11th in the Situation Room, and Bibi Netanyahu was there. He was sitting at the table with our leadership, and he pitched them on this war. Donald Trump was interested. Pete Hegseth was interested. Everybody else, Ratcliffe, farcical. Rubio, it's BS. General Kane, standard operating procedure for Israelis, they oversell. Susie Wiles, we can't be dragged into another Middle Eastern war. Israel pushed us to do this. It doesn't mean that there weren't some good things that came out of it. But that first day, remember, and you guys said, I can't believe you're saying this, when Rubio came out and he said the truth to the gaggle of reporters that the imminent threat was not against us, it was something that was happening for Israel, is the core piece of this. And now we're stuck in it. And Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff are seen as being very pro-Israel. And that's why people want to negotiate with J.D. Vance instead of with them, because they think that they may possibly be talking to someone who isn't just representing Israeli interests.
Yeah, I think if you continued to read the article, you'd see that the president wasn't interested in the regime change and the revolution. He was more interested in destroying the military and knocking out the leadership. Paul Morrell.
I find this to be a very dangerous meme. This idea that Israel is leaning Donald Trump around by the nose. He doesn't know any better. He didn't see Bibi coming.
Bitch.
And all of a sudden now, a guy who doesn't want to listen to anybody on anything because he's the most powerful person in the world
Making the bass
is falling
look a
for
little bad,
deceptions
you know what I
from
mean?
one of our allies. Let's recognize something. And I think there's a false premise here. This is a ceasefire. It's not the deal. We're all talking about this as if, okay, now we have a deal. This is where we're going to go in it. They have these requests from the Iranians, and we're going to be parsing those. No, we just stopped bombing them. I mean, there's historical precedent for this across the board. Everybody remembers the famous Christmas pause when World War I, they came out of the trenches, they all played soccer. The point is that they stopped bombing for a while, which, by the way, operationally works for us as well, because we can re-up all of our interceptors. We can look at our intel again. Donald Trump has a lot better intel than all of us around the table do. Let's remember something. When the time came to hit that meeting of the Ayatollahs, the Israelis had the signal intelligence, all right, reportedly, and this is out, I'm not giving up anything, that they had penetrated the traffic lights, the traffic signals in Iran, in Tehran, and so they knew, oh, they're all incoming to this meeting. But when the time came to say, what are we going to do? Our leadership turned to the CIA, looked at Ratcliffe and said, can you confirm this? And because it's the CIA, they didn't have to say, well, we got to look. They said, no, we have a very sophisticated program vis-a-vis Iran. Yes, it is on our best source. So that's just, I raised it as an example to show that there are things going on behind the scenes that they know that we don't, and they're not obviously going to talk about it too much. So there's a pause to see where we go. Now, relative to Hezbollah, let's remember something. They're a mafia, all right? They get 50% of their funding from Iran. Their equity is to survive. Iran is weak relative to Hezbollah because they got to fund them, and they don't want to lose them because that's their cat's paw. Hezbollah actually is in a better position here relative to Iran because they make money all over the world, including in our hemisphere. So the fact that all of this stuff is going on in Lebanon, color me completely unsurprised because Hezbollah just wants to survive, and it means hitting the Israelis. They're going to do it. Last thing I want to say, just to sort of button things up here. Operationally, let's look at something here. The objective was, at the end of the day, to secure the nuclear material. Because I know imminently, of course, Israel is closer to them, and of course, they're more at risk. But let's remember, they were developing ICBMs. They had a missile that went 2,000 miles that they weren't supposed to have. And everybody has kicked this can down the road from all of our presidents. So if you are willing, and I had ambivalence about this as well when the aircraft carriers were offshore. But if you're going to say we shouldn't have done this, I want to hear the solution. Because sometime between 3 and 5 years, maybe less, there's going to be an ICBM with a nuclear warhead with New York's name on it in Iran.
No.
And that's going to be a problem for the next president. And say what you want about Trump. He's the first guy who said we're not going to cut some BS deal like Kerry cut in Austria that, oh, yeah, there's a JCPOA and we're not naive and all that crap. No, you are naive. They were just kicking it downrange so that they didn't have to deal with it. So if you don't like it, fair enough. But that means you were willing to say, downrange, 3 years from now, we're going to confront this thing, and I have an answer to that then. And when you're dealing with a regime that is messianic and practically has death to America on their money, you better have a better answer than Donald Trump is a warmonger.
Be sure to like and subscribe for all the Fox News latest on YouTube.
Jesse didn't
and
get a
catch
chance
full
to
shows
talk.
streaming now on Fox 1.
Let's hand it on off to Alexandria Hoff live in Washington.
It's all going down Saturday for.
So Tehran is.
High-speed hype train. Hi, MR. Can you please set the record straight on AOC? Anytime her name is mentioned, many chatters, both on YouTube and Twitch, call her a Zionist. Maybe you could just quickly tally all the evidence that she actually supports the claim that she's a Zionist. It's exhausting, and I know you can't fix the internet, but maybe you can get this community in alignment. Thank you. Yes, I'm quite convinced that that claims that AOC is actually a Zionist are artificially inflated by potentially kind of Zionist bots that want to discredit her. You know, she had that vote where she was against Marjorie Taylor Greene's amendment. Then she ended up, which I disagree with. I think she should have signed off on that.
And her reasoning in particular was problematic.
Right. But she's course corrected.
Yes.
And
the ceasefire thing at the convention was a problem too. But those are the two major planks, which even like, you know, Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib had a problem with her talking about working tirelessly for a ceasefire. Those are it. And if you look at her record, she is like top 5. Top 5,
top 6, exactly. There were only 5 other members of Congress who signed on to that Marjorie Taylor Greene Iron Dome proposal. And Marjorie Taylor Greene and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez did not have a good working relationship. I don't think that is
Sandy,
crazy to say.
Sandy, you in there, Sandy?
So, I mean, like, it's just totally overblown. There were only 3 other Democrats. I actually wrote this down the other day just to have it handy that supported Marjorie Taylor Greene's amendment. It was Summer Lee, it was Ilhan Omar, and Rashida Tlaib. And those are some incredible Democrats. I think AOC's right up there with them, but if you want to say she's not as good on this issue as those 3 Democrats, I think you can make a case. That's basically it. The other, then, and sorry, Al Green actually supported it too. But, you know, obviously Al Green is older and Thomas Massie was the only Republican to join on. Now, you know, AOC called Israel's genocide a genocide in March 2024. Marjorie Taylor Greene, it took her over a year later on. I'm just making this comparison because there are people online who like to pit women against one another, but also because Marjorie Taylor Greene is trying to elevate herself as some sort of principled anti-Zionist.
And she's not in Congress anymore, so who cares?
Right.
It'd be nice if she's still in Congress taking some good votes like AOC is doing.
And when you look back, I saw someone retweet a tweet of hers from 2021, AOC's, saying that you can't be a democracy and be in an apartheid state. Before October 7th, all of this, she was in favor of Palestinian rights. She is one of the strongest voices on that front. And it's a difficult distinction to make right now because everybody is just so starved for honesty on the issue of Israel. But it's really important that we elevate voices that have a principle in universal human rights versus nationalism, which is which cannot adequately confront Zionism, which is a nationalist ideology. Marjorie Taylor Greene is a Christian nationalist.
Yeah.
Tucker Carlson is a white nationalist, Christian nationalist, what have you. It's useful right now and important that we have bipartisan outrage about the crimes that Israel has committed. But if we're going to talk about a durable political ideology, it's one that's based in universal human rights and not in nationalism and America First stuff. Because everything you're going to get, perhaps you'll get anti-Zionism from that side for a second, but you're also going to get abuse of immigrants on the streets, a police state here at home. They're more than they're very happily in favor of that.
They support Orban.
And as we've spoken about, ICE is an outgrowth of the war on terror. They are trying to skirt responsibility for U.S. imperialism and the war machine by purely blaming Israel. But they will not confront the underpinnings of that war machine, of our imperialism, which includes the infrastructure that came out of the Iraq War, and that is ICE and domestic militarization of immigration enforcement and treating people outside of our borders as this massive security issue. In fact, they are deeply in favor of that. So it's important to point out that, their criticisms of Israel right now, yes, are welcome. But when you take it a step further, they are trying to wash our hands clean of the monster that we have created in the Middle East and all of the branches that come from that don't just include Israel. I mean, where is Marjorie Taylor Greene on Cuba? We're starving Cuba right now. The blockade means that babies are in danger of dying in incubators because Trump is beholden to a constituency of far-right Cuban diaspora, and that's the other thing. Part of why it's important to point this out about AOC is it's a question of political constituencies and who is responsive.
Yeah.
AOC did correct the record on this, and I'm through DSA, and DSA just endorsed her overwhelmingly because she said that she's also in favor of blocking funding now to the Iron Dome.
And won't make a distinction between offensive and defensive weapons on that regard.
And says that Israel can fund its own Iron Dome, which I think is fine political framing on this front. The reason that she has been put in the position to clarify that is because of the anti-war constituency and, well, really DSA for her, but it's always been on the left. The anti-war movement has always been on the left disproportionately. The constituencies have been on the left. That's why people are like, what do you not like criticize Trump for his Gaza policies, which by the way we do. That's just like made up by Blue Anon people. But why we were screaming from the rooftops in particular with Joe Biden is because we're supposed to be a part of your political constituency. And politicians, there is an over focus on their celebrity and their individual character. And with AOC, there's a lot of extremely bizarre psychosexual stuff and weirdness about her. And that comes with being a female candidate, and it comes with being an attractive woman. So that's part of it. And of course, there's like fetishization of her based on race and stuff like that. But she has shown responsiveness to the exact constituencies that she would need to have credibility on this issue, and I just think it's kind of open and shut.
As to the sort of online stuff, I mean, you get like, I think I would call them Green Party dead enders who need this to not actually work, to need this to be a waste of time because they're actually not showing anything that's worth an effort. Whereas like this is actual leadership. AOC coming out and saying this at a DSA convention, or in in the run up to a DSA endorsement fight. It binds her destiny closer to the DSAs and DSAs closer to her, which I think is a good thing, because I think there was some a little bit of slippage there, and I think it points out, like, this is the voting for DSA's NYC DSA voting to re-endorse AOC chapter wide. 85% voted yes, and 14% say no. And I would say if you are one of those people who would say no, join. If you're not in DSA, then it doesn't really matter.
100%.
And a lot of this is people who think that, like, the correct response, and we saw that was with, like, Jimmy Dore's entire thing. Like, the thing that is needed is to watch the right media and to have the right postures about everything. And no, it actually requires you to get involved in politics. Like, we need to get involved in politics, and that this, whether it's like Zoran's thing, you see a lot of, like, anti-Graham Plattner thing stuff too. And I'm sorry, like, okay, it's very prevalent on Blue Sky. It's not prevalent in Poland, and so you can still, like, maybe post about all this stuff, but it's not making any impact. And the people that are making an impact are people like in DSA or including AOC, who actually ran for office.
He's
and
right.
Like knocked off Joe Crowley. And again, like, there's plenty of times where I've had issue with particularly AOC's communication on a lot of this stuff. But I'm sorry, she has a political talent that can drive people to vote for her. And that is something that I think people shouldn't poo-poo. And it'd be nice if, like, it's something that in the UK, the Green Party has understood that. I don't know if the Green Party understands how to win votes here. They don't seem to. And I think there's people like Jimmy Dore who need this to fail, because they've been saying it's been a waste of time the entire time. Well, now all of a sudden it doesn't look like a waste of time, because even you're celebrating a shift that she's made.
Yeah, and Zoran has given people a taste of what it looks like for the left to be in power. And I think that momentum...
Not so scary, is it?
Emboldens, I mean, the popularity of that movement emboldens her to also bind herself to DSA even further.
Correct.
She's not going to, like, lead on this stuff beyond politicians in general. Shouldn't be expected to be like civil rights leaders. I think that's, like, a real problem we have, is actually, if you look at the civil rights era, they were being yelled at by the actual leaders to say, please do something about Jim Crow after all these years. So, like, even the best of them, they're going to need to be pushed by people outside, but that push needs to be done in a way that's, like, solidaristic and not wrecking, because they will understand that this is bullshit. And, there's all this stuff about, like, who's pushing for Medicare for all? Is it the exact same politicians who the people who wanted to force the vote all years ago said were worthless about it? Well, they're still the ones carrying the flame, and that is more important, having the ability to gain power, and then you can get a chance to use it, because now everyone's saying, why doesn't AOC use the power? Well, now she's shifting on this sort of thing in a way that's going to have severe impacts for these races. To not be able to say, I support defensive weapons for Israel, but not offensive, that's a big thing.
Yeah. Ben Shabibo's eyebrow says, AOC's course correction is a great example of when you should take yes for an answer. F the Green Party dead enders. Dave from Jamaica, AOC hate is mostly algorithmic bullshit. The left of her are people chasing clicks, and to her right, people are chasing clicks. Yeah. And to the shows that they're criticizing her, they're just mad she doesn't go on there anymore.
Yeah.
Same with Bernie, by the way. But Ro Khanna and Marjorie Taylor Greene will go on TYT, so they're the leaders of the next new political
Again, Marjorie Taylor Greene is not a politician.
To a new PAC.
Marjorie Taylor Greene is a media figure.
Yeah.
You need to stop. Like, she doesn't count. Like,
I know.
Get a Republican that. I mean, that's the other thing is, like, they all support ICE.
Yeah.
Booted.
Like, which is, again, for bullshit reasons. Occupying American cities with militarized thugs is, to me, the same problem as occupying other countries. I'm not any happier to do it here for horseshit reasons that they've all fed into about immigrants.
Yeah.
Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every
A ceasefire that rings hollow. Only a few hours ago, the world was holding its breath. No president should declare an intention that an entire civilization will die.
Well, it's genocide, isn't it?
Obviously, the market has responded. Who depends on you, Adam? Your mom?
Okay, I also have a significant other. I'm listening to a song called Ain't Nothing Gonna Break My Stride, Ain't Nothing Gonna Slow Me Down, and that's how I feel about this.
I know that you're going to do it. You have to debate them again.
I told your people when they reached out to mine, I don't really think this makes sense.
The first debate revealed that he's not that good at it, if I'm honest. Well, many of you have been demanding to know when we will release the second round of our great debate about global terrorism, featuring Dave Smith and Adam Sosnick. Well, all will be revealed later in today's show, but we begin today with our ongoing coverage of the fragile Iran ceasefire and the massive ongoing turmoil across the Middle East. Hussam Zomla is the Palestinian ambassador to the United Kingdom, and he rejoins me in the Uncensored studio. Welcome back, Ambassador. It's really good to see you.
Thank you, Piers, for having me back.
Where are we with this war, with the ceasefire, with everything that's happening? What's your overview?
Ceasefire that rings hollow. We are in the middle of a cycle. We are not at the end of a cycle. This is one of the most dangerous moments of your lifetime and my lifetime. Only a few hours ago, the world was holding its breath for an entire civilization to be wiped out.
What did you feel about that?
I felt
about the wording of the post by President Trump.
I was extremely concerned. Concerned is a diplomatic word, but worry, because I thought, oops, we are really at an edge here. A real edge. I was concerned we're witnessing a moment similar to the 30s.
Right.
I was very scared, not only for myself, but for the globe and for the children.
Should the President of the United States talk in that language?
No president should talk in that language. No president should declare an intention that an entire civilization will die.
No. Well, it's genocide, isn't it?
Will die tonight. No, nobody should do so. And, you know, that brings us to the conversation. And given the gravity of the moment, Piers, it's important that you and I have a conversation today, because as I was driving here, I decided to rewatch our first interview, just to refresh my memory. And I found out that I was saying to you and to the world through you that history did not begin on 7th of October. That, you know, the 6th of October already was the deadliest year in the West Bank. Second, that Israel will take the attacks of the 7th of October to start a far broader and bigger aggression against the Palestinian people, remember? They will not target Hamas only, they will target the Palestinian people, practically warning from the risk of genocide against our people. And I warn this will not only happen in Gaza, but also in the West Bank, where their eyes is on the annexation of the West Bank, and you're following the settler terrorism and all that is happening.
I think it's appalling.
All that is happening right now. Furthermore, I said Hamas, any other Palestinian group are not the cause of the conflict, they are the consequence of the conflict. And short of focusing on the root cause, this will be repeated again, and you and I, Piers, will be discussing the next war and what happens. I remember saying what happens in Palestine does not stay in Palestine. And that the international community, by either being silenced or worse, being actually complicit and enabling what Israel is doing, we are going to be all sitting ducks. And look where we are today. Look exactly where we are today. The moment the world allows the normalization of genocide, then you have today, the moment Netanyahu heard a ceasefire arrangements after the announcement of President Trump, he goes into rampage in Lebanon, killing tens of Lebanese and hundreds wounded. And as I was driving again, I was seeing posts by the Lebanese health authorities sharing photos of children to identify their parents. I mean, so what happens in Gaza did not stay in Gaza. And this is a moment when we think again about the guardrails we have established together, and can we bring back the guardrails, Piers? Can we really press the brakes right now? Especially that the ceasefire doesn't seem to be holding.
Let me play devil's advocate with you for a moment.
Please.
This is not necessarily what I think. This is what
why
the
would you do that,
counter-argument is. If you're the Israelis, they have seen for decades now what they believe to be this superpower in the region of Iran, with its tentacles coming out to all these terrorist proxies, Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis in particular, all wedded to an ideology of destruction in Israel, of killing Israelis, of destroying Israel, refusing to even concede Israel's right to exist. And that Iran has funded this, it has supplied arms and so on. And that they're having an existential fight for their own survival. That's how the Israelis see it. What do you say to people that believe that? To the average Israeli who sees the rockets coming in from all these groups, knows Iran's been funding it, knows they've been propping it up, whatever the historical arguments, which I completely concede are legitimate, but whatever those arguments, if you're the average Israeli and you've seen that, and you feel your country is under this existential threat, they would say they are doing what they can to defend themselves. What do you say?
I would say that to the Israeli people and to the people of the region, but particularly to the Israelis, stop listening to your politicians and stop thinking that you can drive your security by creating the insecurity for everybody else. You can't do that. I mean, you know, Israel's policy has never been just a regime change. Israel's policy has been creating chaos, has been creating disintegration of states, failed states all over us. Look, in the last month and a half since the beginning of this war on Iran, the target was not really the regime or any military structures only. The target was civilian structures. The target was to train other groups around them. So Iran is disintegrated. Does this bring security to Israel? Really? Did the genocide in Gaza bring any security to Israel, or what they are doing in the West Bank, the ethnic cleansing?
Okay, but I get it. But do you accept the Iranian regime has been a malevolent regime, and that its tentacles have spread out to groups who do want to target and attack Israel on a regular basis? Do you accept that?
The Iranian regime, the Iranian government has been an issue, but not just for Israel, not for Israel, but for primarily its immediate neighbors, the Arab Gulf countries, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Emirates, all that. Kuwait is being bombed as we speak, and the other Gulf countries. So yes, it is an issue, but look at this. See what the Arab world did for years now. They realized that we have issues with Iran, but they chose diplomacy. They chose dialogue. The Arab world chose upgrading the diplomatic relation with Iran to full relations, reopening embassies, Saudi Arabia and Iran. They chose neighborly relationship because they realized that Iran is a neighbor. It's an ancient civilization. We have to find the formula with Iran, but Israel always is the odd actor in this. They always choose aggression. Now, this is not the first time. Pierce, this is an 80 years old cycle. It happened with Lebanon, before, with Syria, with Jordan, with Egypt, with Iraq. Remember Iraq? And I know that you were one of the voices against the war in Iraq. Remember, it was Netanyahu, Junior Netanyahu at the time, instigating, propagating the war against Iraq and now against Iran. Aren't we learning any lesson? After all these years, does Israel really find its peace and its security in destroying other people? Do you really continue arguing that you have the right to exist? Exist where? Exist on the ruins of your neighbors? Exist in occupied territory? Exist at the skulls of 2/3 of the Palestinian people after the Nakba? If you want to be a normal state, if you want to normalize your relationship with the neighboring countries, you have to become normal. Define your bloody borders first and foremost. Israel in its current composition is a racist, expansionist system. And Netanyahu is not the only problem. Netanyahu is speaking to a wider segments of the Israeli society.
Is the problem...
We need to resolve this.
Okay, is the problem in Israel at the moment that the government is effectively dominated by people like Ben-Gvir, Smotrich, very hard right, very hardliners, who clearly do want to annex the West Bank, who, if they had their way, would get rid of all Palestinians from Gaza. They would just kick them out. We're seeing aggressive expansion of the settlers on the West Bank, which are some appalling scenes happening all the time, which is all at their behest. And then only last week we had this, what I thought was a despicable spectacle in the Knesset of Ben-Gvir cracking champagne open as he wore his noose badge on his lapel of his suit with his cohorts, celebrating a new law, which, and we've got footage of it here as we're talking about it, which I just thought was repellent. This is in the Knesset, in the parliamentary centre of Israel, celebrating the fact that a new law had come out which only relates to Palestinians, that they determine are terrorists and can therefore be executed with the death penalty. It doesn't apply to... That, to me, on any level, is just another form of apartheid. I mean, that plays into the whole argument about the occupation, as many see it, of Gaza and so on. They're not even trying to hide it, right? There is a two-tier system now in Israeli law, clearly celebrated by people in the government. If you're Palestinian, you'll get the death penalty for committing an act of terror, but not if you're an Israeli. And I found the way they celebrated that horrific. And I'm not even Palestinian.
This is not just another form of apartheid. This is flagrant, in-your-face apartheid.
Yes.
And according to our colleagues from South Africa who experienced South Africa apartheid, what they had was a picnic compared to the Israeli apartheid. And I'm quoting their officials as they visited Palestine recently. And this two-tier system, the racism, the signaling of Palestinians have been ongoing for a long time. The problem is it has not been revealed as such. Ben-Gvir, he is convicted by an Israeli court to be a terrorist. The lady, Maloch, a member of Knesset who sat on that platform, had a video of asking her young boy, what will you do when you grow up? He said, I will be a soldier, I'll drive a jeep and go around killing Arabs and Palestinians. She hugged him. This is the kind of incitement that goes at the top of the Israeli government and levels that go unchecked. And this is exactly where...
How did we
allow this to
but
fester?
Ambassador, again, to play devil's advocate again, you could say the same thing about Gaza, right? You could say that Hamas has wielded an influence over Gazans where many of them would have young kids who they indoctrinate to want to kill Israelis, right?
Okay.
It works on both sides, right? I'm not getting into the validity of the history and everything else. I'm just saying there are now, I think, quite significant numbers of Israelis that feel the way you just articulated, but also Palestinians who feel the same way about Israelis. How do we get through this?
No, but it's important. Also, part of our first conversation was the double standards. And please, let's talk about that, because we have suffered from it for 8 years. 8 years of suffering from sheer duplicity, selectivity, double standards. What is applied on Israel is not applied on us or anybody else. You know that there is 127 attacks only in the last month, terror attacks, settler militias. Israel is now literally creating para-terror militias to attack our communities. 100 communities in the West Bank, from the very north to the west to the south, have been subjected to this terror campaign. 8 Palestinians were killed only in the last few weeks by settlers. Do you think one of them was brought to justice? There any charge, any prosecution?
No, I've seen clear evidence that the IDF basically turns a blind eye to a lot of this stuff.
And if you're talking about apartheid, look, the ceasefire in Gaza was announced the moment all Israeli hostages have gone back to their homes and families, and even the last body of an Israeli soldier was exhumed, so the ceasefire was announced. Good. What about our hostages? Thousands of them in Israeli jail, you know, without trial, without charge. What about our bodies? Do you know, Pierce, that now Israel has 776 Palestinian bodies buried in what they call cemetery of numbers, denying their family the sense of closure and grief, and this has been happening for years. Do you know that if a Palestinian detainee dies in prison, in Israeli jail, and 90 have died since October 7th. 90 Palestinians have died because of torture, because of rape, and these racists would go and protest against any prosecution or charging of the rapers. However, all these accounts of death, so the Israeli system is capable to kill Palestinians with impunity.
There are 9,000 Palestinians in Israeli prisons, is that right?
There are 9,000, but
so my question for you is, I know some have been held without trial. I always think that's wrong. But how many of the 9,000 have committed acts of violence against Israelis?
Well, the conviction rate of the Israeli marshal...
I'm not asking that question.
The conviction rate is almost 100%, 99%.
I understand, but I'm asking you, how many of the 9,000 currently in prison, Palestinians in Israeli prisons, have committed acts of violence against Israelis?
I don't know, and then you need international...
But you must accept that many of them will have done, right?
No, you must accept also international legality, because do you consider that to be violence or resistance?
Well, I would argue... to your point about what's going on with the settlers, I think some of them are clearly committing acts of terrorism, and yet the new law that's been brought in would not cover them. It only covers Palestinians. And so I feel that's outrageous, right? So just to be clear, I think that's an outrageous double standard.
I know.
But I also am not naive enough to think that of the 9,000 Palestinians in Israeli jails, that many of those people may not have committed heinous acts of violence. I'm sure they have.
So you go and legislate a death penalty only for Palestinians.
Well, I think it's wrong.
Only for Palestinians. Yeah. But when many Israeli terrorists in the West Bank are killing Palestinians in real time in front of your eyes, it goes absolutely...
Yeah, it's outrageous.
Okay, but that's the heart of it. And you cannot compare a Palestinian group, Hamas or others, with a country, a state, Israel, that has a seat in the UN. Do you think we hold them...
Where I would compare... Hang on.
Do you think we hold them to the same standards?
No, but where I would... Where I would compare is the scenes I've seen of settlers charging around in the last